And at first, we were pretty disappointed, and we thought, most of the action was happening in Syria, and we wanted to be there as a fighter pilot. You want to be in the action. You don't wish for war, but you feel like you have this skill that can make the difference. And so the first couple of months of the deployment were pretty benign, but then something started changing. In early 2017, ISIS started taking a hold of the country, and they were growing exponentially. And so, there's a big threat that they'd already destabilized Syria and Iraq, and they'd start destabilizing Afghanistan. So our orders straight from the Secretary of Defense were to annihilate ISIS. And so what went from a routine deployment kicked in overdrive. We were doing 24-hour operations. And the mission that you mentioned happened on the very last mission that I flew in Afghanistan. And so to kind of set the scene, we were getting ready to fly home. So you fly your jets into the country, you fly them back out. And so our F-16 Block 50s, so they're the Wild Weasel mission aircraft. The heritage goes back to Vietnam. If you've seen the latest Top Gun, those missiles trying to shoot down the Maverick and Rooster, those are surface-to-air missile sites. And so that's what we train to do. That's what the planes are optimized for. So our planes were getting ready to fly back home, and we had another squadron from Aviano, Italy that had just shown up, and they're Block 40. So they're designed to do more, less of the seed mission, more of kind of a traditional F-16 mission. And so my job that day was just to be able to show one of the new pilots the ropes. It's what's called a LAO, local area orientation ride. And so we start briefing it up. Midway through the briefing, our operations supervisor bursts in. He says, there's a group of Army Rangers. They're under attack. We need you guys to launch ASAP. So we run to our lockers, put on all our gear, take off, fly into the fight. And, there's a group of Army Rangers. They're trying to make their way back to their forward operating base. They're under attack. We start employing weapons. 10 minutes later, I've employed all my weapons. And so that's a problem because we're fragged to be on station for 4 hours. We're the only fighter squadron there. And by the way, we're flying one of the Aviano Block 40 jets. And so, we come up with a plan. We call back to the KAOC. KAOC says, there's no additional planes, no additional pilots. And so we come up with a plan. Why don't we fly back, get one of the jets that's getting ready to fly back home, our Block 50 F-16s, and I can fly that. I can keep my wingman on station and take that back into the fight. Now, typically that takes a full day to be able to turn the jet from kind of a ferry configuration with all the fuel tanks on and getting ready to fly home and put on weapons. But they dedicated all the maintainers, who really are the hardest workers in the Air Force. They're really the backbone of how we're able to fly. And so I go back, take one of our jets, the Shaw F-16 Block 50s, back into the fight. Long story short, airborne tanker shows up. We start doing what are called yo-yo ops, where I'll go off to the tanker, refuel. My wingman will stay on station. We do that back and forth for a while until the Army Rangers are able to make their way back home into the base safely. Unfortunately, that day, we didn't take any casualties.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's by the way, my buddy Jeff's here as well. Jeff's also a pilot. And I thought he'd be great to add into this. I guess I'll say this, and I'm going to kick it over to you.
I think you're on mute.
Yeah. So, hey, Hasard, it's great to meet you. Call sign Fish. Not a pilot, navigator, electronic warfare officer by trade, actually. So quite familiar with AGM-88s. I shot 2 of them in desert
nice.
in Serbia. So yeah.
What platform?
Off of EA6Bs.
Okay, yeah. We dealt with, work with you guys all the time at Red Flags. Still remember, the E6Bs taxing by. You have 4 people back there. Look pretty cramped.
It's the family model.
Yeah, exactly. Family. We call it the 2-seat F-16s family model. So that's like that's like a station wagon. But yeah, very familiar with working with you guys. So yeah, great to meet you.
It's interesting. So when you talk to folks who fly helicopters or ride on boats or fly jets or walk on the ground, none of us want each other's environment, right? Like, your guys' environment is so dangerous. It's rare to fly a plane twice in the same day, it's common to go on 2-foot patrols, but you guys be like, the fuck if I ever want to get on the ground and walk around with you guys, I mean,
right.
TAC-Vs do it, but it's rare. Like, we don't want anybody else's version of danger. As much as like we're all tough and can go do incredible things, I've always found it interesting who guys who ride on boats do not want to ride on the land in combat. Like, they just don't, they're never comfortable doing it. Is it just because we get used to that variety of danger? What do you attribute that? Like you're talking about clear, like in your book here, clear thinking. Here it is, The Art of Clear Thinking. Clear thinking on the ground, clear thinking in the water, clear thinking in the air, clear thinking with rotary aircraft. It's all going to be the same thing, but completely different demands on the system.
Yeah, so I would say a couple things to that. The first is you train for your environment, and so you're very familiar. For me, very familiar flying. I'm not familiar what to look for and what to do on the ground, and so there's that uncertainty. So we, just like you guys train every day to be the best at what you're doing, and so when you don't have that muscle memory, there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of kind of, I guess, fear that you're not going to be able to perform your best. But that being said, I tried hard to get on a patrol when I was in Afghanistan. I wanted to have that perspective because I think that's so much more valuable when you can see through somebody else's eyes, even if it's not, at an expert level. You can talk with them. You can kind of understand what their issues is. Because as you know, close air support, one of the most challenging missions out there, the perspective difference, very different. We're all familiar with that. Just trying to take off from our home airport, you're trying to find your house, and it's almost impossible. And that's a place you're very familiar with. And it's because it looks so different from the air than from the ground. And so, so I think it's just like people who are really familiar, maybe running. When they get in the ocean, that doesn't mean they're comfortable in the ocean, and vice versa. People who really get swimming might not be good in the desert. So it's what your experience is.
Yeah. Jeff, thoughts on that?
No, I think he's right. And, just to kind of piggyback on his book, right? If I think back to my first flight in the United States Air Force, I was the exact opposite of clear thinking, right? I was whatever the opposite of clear thinking is, that's where I was, right? But that's why I had an instructor, and that's why, I had done tons of time in the simulator force, and eventually you grow this comfort zone, right? And you become comfortable in the air, and what to the spidey senses that you learn, like, hey, something's not right with my jet right now. I don't know what it is, but I can feel it. And everyone else who'd never been in a jet for hundreds or thousands of hours would be fat, dumb, and happy just flying along. And that's where you get to that art, right? That art of clear thinking, that you can move at 480 knots at 500 feet and still have the wherewithal to be able to employ some of the most advanced weapons in the United States military.
I don't know if you have this experience, but we have a saying called, as soon as you put on your helmet, you lose 20 IQ points, especially for new students. So, that's something I've seen all the time, because it looks easy on the ground, gets far more difficult in the air when you're at speed, under G, you're sweating. It gets a lot more challenging to be able to think clearly. And I think that's the art of going from that student status where you're kind of terrified, you're way behind the jet, to being able to anticipate what's going on, not just for you, but when you're leading a formation, other aircraft out there.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the perspective thing is huge too. I have had the misfortune of being in a nasty battle, in Iraq, and the close air support guy came out of the heavens, supersonic. Look, I'm going to explain what I experienced. You guys are going to tell me I'm wrong, and that's fine, because I don't know. But this guy came in. I happened to be looking up, and I happened to see the jet coming, which is impossible already. And then by the time I heard it, it was already leaving and gone and in the afterburners, and all kinds of chaos and mayhem was brought upon the enemy. And it was like, it reminded me that even if you guys fly a racetrack for 8 hours and you're up there. And when we need help, good God, it's like the best kind of help in the world. Nobody wants to be on the bad end of what you guys got when you come streaking out of the sky like that. It was amazing. And it gave me, look, I already respect pilots, especially, guys who get to do what you guys get to do, because that's even a higher level. But when you actually see it applied, when you see Kiowas rolling through your valley and you watch everybody who's not you streak for like cover, you understand like the power of an A-10 on station and what it means in terms of providing cover. I don't need you there all the time because I was a guy who had to talk to people. But when you come through, it's clear who the boss is, and it's you guys. And it's thank you for all of that, because it's easy to lose sight of that because we don't see the fruits of it. Hopefully, most of the time, because we're not in enough fights and we don't need the close air support. We're doing other things.
Well, hey, it's amazing what you guys are doing on the ground, especially these low intensity conflicts like Afghanistan, Iraq. You guys are putting your life a lot more on the lines than us, but yeah, that's really our superpower, is being able to fly quickly. So we're only squadron in Afghanistan, and we were able to support every flight multiple ticks. And so you'd be able to show up on station, help out people along the Pakistani border, fly across the country, help out people on the Iranian border. And so you just go from firefight to firefight to firefight, and you guys might only see 5 minutes of that, but multiply that by maybe 10, and you can kind of see how it's a different perspective. But I really enjoy being in the military, and especially being in combat. You see everybody at the top of their game, and the stakes are high, and it's something that you don't get a chance to really see in the civilian world.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah, I wish. I mean, he's knocking it out of the park. He's right 100% of the time, right?
That's what we want.
And I mean that. I mean, Hasard. It's interesting. So Hasard, I know we just met, but and I know you don't know my background, but I was also a PRT commander for the United States Air Force, right? So I did these foot patrols. I did the ground maneuver in Afghanistan, and I would tell you, to me, kind of as Pete has alluded to, and you, it was harder for me to do that, right, than it was for me to do 20 minutes of sheer chaos of going in and being shot at and getting out, right? And I would tell you the reason is, and that this is an interesting, and I'd love to, because you wrote this book, I'd kind of like your thoughts on it, right? In aviation military, we force what I would call compressed comprehension, to where you're going to squeeze everything into a certain time window, and you need to be as clear as a bell in your mind and monitoring everything. And I did that. I prepared for that. That's how that's what I did. So we leave the wire, and I'm in my Humvee, and I'm the commander. And, now it's 2 hours into an 8-hour drive to the northern part of our district. And I'm spent. I have no energy left, because I expected this compression of comprehension. But to a guy on the ground, they had this expectation that they had to be on their game for 8 hours. They could pace themselves, have this level of endurance. Maybe they didn't have to worry about the ground coming up and killing them, but they were worried about other things. And to me, it was really hard to stay, and I don't want to say stay awake, but stay alert, like you would want a guy to be on the thing. So when you wrote your book, did you talk to ground guys or naval guys at all about what their combat arts were for maintaining clear heads?
Sure. So leading into the book, I started a podcast. And so on the podcast, I had a chance to talk to a lot of special forces soldiers. Plus, we integrate and talk a lot with different career fields, whether it's Navy SEALs, Green Berets, astronauts, trying to share best practices. And so I would say your point is absolutely correct. Being able to stay on your game for multiple hours. I say, when with these missions in training, it can be less, about an hour and a half, because that's all the fuel we have. You go through the fuel pretty quickly in a F-16 or F-35. But when you have a tanker on station, now you can stay out there indefinitely. And in the F-16, we have a very basic autopilot. It's almost worthless. And so you're hand flying it the whole time. Same thing when you're crossing the Atlantic, you're with a tanker there, and you're completely hand flying in formation, refueling about 10 times. And if you encounter weather, now you're flying with just, a few feet of wingtip clearance. And if you ever go lost wingman, it's a big deal. And so you have to be on your game. I say it's like taking the SAT, driving in a car, you have 11 browser windows open, and you're trying to do all this stuff at once. And so it is really challenging. And, how do you pace yourself? Because I've seen quite a few pilots who go out of the gate, they're trying to do everything perfectly, and you can't maintain that for for a 5-hour bull, like, on station for 5 hours or more. And so you have to be able to find ways to kind of rest. For me, that was, just taking a few sips of water, a couple deep breaths every 10 minutes or something like that. And then making sure to fuel your body. So making sure to have a little bit of peanut butter, a snack, something like that. Because if you're going out there for 10 hours, you have to make sure that you have all the, biological stuff good to go in order to be able to make good decisions for extended periods of time.
That's a big deal. The ability to think clearly, perform properly, and develop that innate sense, that you get to when whatever it is, how to push through sleepiness or whatever it's going to be. Before I launch out of the camp, I've already hydrated to a certain level, and then I top off. So I instead of carrying 2 liters of water, I pound one into me because my body's going to know what to do with it. I don't eat too much breakfast. I've got a little hot dog type thing or something in my pocket for later on that I eat, to get a little shot of energy, a little shot of protein. And even then, for me, for what we had to do, I didn't take on new workout routines because I couldn't afford to be sore and stiff. So I would work out, but I would manage how hard I worked out because I need to be ready to, whatever it is, run, hide, whatever, fold into a small shape, whatever you had to do. And so there's a lot of that pre-work that goes into clearing out your thoughts when you're, for me, walking across a place and I'm encountering a barber or a farmer, and I've got to ask them questions. Because that time I have with them, maybe the only time I ever talk to them, and I have to earn my spot on that patrol. If I'm not bringing back valuable information for the boss, then I don't need to be in that patrol. They can put somebody else out there to pull security because I'm pretty useless beyond that. Sure, I can shoot, but if the spy starts shooting, he doesn't get to go talk to people anymore. Like he's got to go do something else, right? And that clarity, a lot of it for me came by being ready for everything. When I got there, I'd already asked all the questions. Practice, like I would walk circles around my camp and just work on my question techniques, conversations. I talk out loud to myself to figure out what would the next question be, and I'd reverse it and say, if I want to find out where the bombs are, I would ask, what's the question before that? What's the question before that? How do I get into that conversation stream? All of that work allowed me a clarity to, one, trust the person who's going to look out for me, work with my interpreters we had trust, and understand what the mission was so that all of the other things that might get in the way were now gone because I'd already done all that work.
Yeah, agreed. It comes down to preparation. You don't rise to the level of your expectation, you fall to the level of your preparation. So doing it over and over again in training and figuring out all the tweaks there and being ready to go. And so, for instance, even in training, we will sanitize our flight suits. And that is what we do in combat, just in case you get shot down, you don't have all your patches and things like that on you. But in training, that's kind of a line in the sand where you are now not focusing on anything else going on in your life, family at home, office work. You're fully focused on the mission. And that also signals to everybody else that you are getting ready to fly, because it can be dangerous. Even in training, we've lost far more pilots in training than in combat. People are often surprised. The U.S. has lost 300 F-16s over the years. So it's quite a high number, and most of that's in training. And so it lets everybody know, hey, you're sanitized, you're fully focused on flying. And so I think that starts in training and extends into combat.
I followed the work of John Boyd in the OODA loop and all the other things. OODA loop is what everybody knows, so we can talk about that kind of thing. But one of the things where I kind of disagree with him, and this is because I've got different work, but culture was just a little nodule. It's like, you got to understand culture so you can orient. You got to do way better than that from my work, right? You have to understand culture so you can be relevant to the people around you, whether it's the military that I'm assisting or it's the locals that I'm talking to. But also, I don't need to outspin somebody else's cycle. I don't need to be inside of their loop. I need to perform at the right speed. And that for me was much more important, because if I'm trying to outthink and outwin and outdominate everybody else, and I'm trying to outmaneuver, then I'm not relevant to the ground fight. And so that was a lesson that I had to learn, because you always want to just dominate things, right? But in my line of work, you can't just dominate. I had to find other tools to go to. So the infantry is already going to do security, you know, whatever it is, they're going to be great at that. I don't need to focus on that at all. The less I focus on security, the better, because now I can focus on this thing that they can't deal with, right? So I had to slow way down, add in the things to my kit, to my mission that only were relevant to what I do. I don't need to carry a shotgun. I need to carry an extra pen in case something happens. But it really redefined how I thought about the pace of my work. It was, for me, it was much more critical path as opposed to path of least resistance or path that I just smash through and make myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're specializing. And so that's something that we encounter quite a bit, especially when, so you train the first couple of years to master your jet. So you spend years doing that. And then at some point you transition to becoming a flight lead. So you go through the flight lead upgrade program. After that, you're in charge of 2 to 4 other aircraft. And so that could be a difficult transition for pilots because you've been taught you're fully focused on yourself. You're really selfish. You're performing all the maneuvers perfectly. And then now you become more of a leader. And so you are kind of taking a step back, and you might not be able to perform as well individually because now you're in charge of 4 other aircraft. And that's all right, because now you're a leader and your output is the results of your entire team. So you're now specializing in leading as opposed to just flying your jet around. And it can be a difficult transition for pilots, but it sounds just like that. You're specializing in a different area. And so now you don't have to do, all the jobs out there. You have other people that are doing those jobs as you're leading the fight.
Yeah. Jeff, again, like the PRT thing, as opposed to being in the air, that's totally different job, totally different pace, right?
Yeah, it is. And look, I got the trifecta, right? Not that I wish it on anybody, but I'm an Air Force officer. I retired as a colonel, got an exchange program to the Navy, flew prowlers off the Connie. So I got 118 traps, which as Hasard and I know is 118 bad decisions, because you should always land on land, not on a boat. And then it got sucked into the Army and then did a PRT event. So I'm about as joined as they get. But Pete, I heard you talking about that you've got to slow down, and I would tell you that the OODA loop's not intended. John Boyd never intended the OODA loop to be I think fast is a relative term, right? I mean, we would always say, and maybe Hasard had the same phrase in Vipers, was, slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right?
Right.
So, as you can increase once you get it. There's no point in rushing through an OODA loop. I mean, that's pointless, right? Because you're going to end up with a bad decision, right? Rushing through an OODA loop is going to lead you to a bad decision. And if you're led to a bad decision, especially a series of bad decisions, then you're really, really you're in a hurt locker, right? The idea is to be able to actually have an OODA loop that is accomplished, because I don't want to say faster, right? Accomplished before your enemy gets to their decision matrix. So if you're gathering intelligence and you're doing your slow is smooth, smooth is fast, and you garner that intelligence and get it to your commander before the enemy does, then you've achieved what John Boyd has set out to do. I mean, that's kind of my take on that.
Yeah, I think it's important to know the speed that you can go, because it's a spectrum. And so on one end, no decision is a decision. So a lot of people get locked into paralysis by analysis, and they're never making decisions. And so that can lead to a lot of problems because you only have so many resources to allocate. You can't spend all day thinking about a problem. But at the other end, kind of as humans, our natural reaction is to jump to action, at least for a lot of us. And you can make a lot of rash decisions doing that. And so we would have a saying in the jet to wind the clock when you have a difficult decision to be made. And what that means is the F-16, even though, very advanced avionics in it, still has a hand wound clock in it. And this is a holdover from, a couple different reasons. One, the nuclear mission, but then also, if there's a full electrical failure, you still have that clock to navigate by. And seemingly useless. Of course, we have GPS, all these other ways to tell time. But the instructors would say, when you have a difficult decision to make, reach down and wind the clock. And it just takes your hand off the controls and prevents you from making a rash decision, lets you take a few deep breaths, and then you can make a good decision. So you don't want to be too fast making a decision, but you also don't want to be too slow. And I think that's that art of figuring out where you want to be.
that experience to the ground too allows you to, we'll use OODA loop as more example. It allows you to get better, more efficient. I remember like when the clock slowed down for me in a firefight, where I realized there's different streams of time in a firefight, and sometimes the firefights a blink of an eye, and you're like, how long? An hour? And you're amazed by it. And other times, it's like the clock is slow, and it can be different for everybody in the zone that you're in. And so understanding. For me, I'm all about the perspectives, all the different specs, respect, perspective, introspective, all these different things where I've got to take my camera and move it around the area that I'm in so that I can see better. And then I can speed up how I'm acting. And so if I'm getting shot at, my job is to assess the danger. And I literally have stood still in a firefight because I wasn't in immediate danger. Little bits of the building were hitting me in the face, but I wasn't and the guy I was talking to, we weren't being shot at. We were just being shot toward. But we weren't the target of that. And so we were able to, in this case, slow down and have a conversation, which sounds insane now. And I didn't even think about how insane that was until a couple of years ago. And I'm like, I stood still. And then like in a little alcove, right? We weren't going to get hit by anything. I mean, but we could. And so time had really slowed down for me in that time too. So there's the maturity that you get so that you know when to step on the accelerator, know when to let off. And also, and you talk about power in here too, in the book, which is, by the way, here it is, The Art of Clear Thinking. You guys should get this thing. You're going to love it. I have to allow my partner, the person I'm talking to, the government leader, whoever it is, I have to allow them to be an expert. I can't out Afghan an Afghan person. I can't, if I'm in their home and they're providing me food, I've got to be a great guest. And I have to surrender power in a way that allows them to give me something because they've got the power and work with that. Like one of the big problems that we had, this is Pete's point of view, was we never looked at the Afghan or the Iraqi leaders and said, what is your plan? You're the boss. So the smartest thing I ever learned was this Afghan, he was a commander, he was a holy man, and he was a governor. And so in this case, he was a governor. And he's like, Pete, there's only room for one sword in the scabbard. And I'm like, all right, who's the sword going to be? And he's like, it's me. You know that. And I'm like, right. So I take that back to the boss, and he's like, yeah, all right, he's the sword. What's his plan? And then I went and I laid out his plan, and now we knew a direction to go in. There's a whole new set of errors and problems and mistakes to make, but at least now we're trying to be in alignment with the actual sword's plan, as opposed to look, if you wanted to stand out to me as someone who was a problem on the battlefield and have me write something to the boss, utter these words in front of me. I don't care what the general or the governor wants. My boss wants this. I'm like, oh, this person is obsolete. I now, this is where the problem is going to be. And I hope that all that resonates. I don't mean to be negative towards anybody, because this is really hard stuff to figure out. And I had the fortune of being on the ground a lot, but that ability to modulate time, to know when to surrender power to somebody else so I could get something back to work with was invaluable to me. And I took the OODA loop and clocked it to decide, act, observe, orient as the starting point, which changed a lot of it for me, because I was able to go out and act instead of being paralyzed, and then assess how I did. And did I bring any of me into that mission? So ego had to be out. And if I sensed my ego being in there, now I could trim that and get back to work and quickly get back to work in a way that was better than what I was doing before. And this is me talking about my stuff. I'm hoping you guys can apply this towards what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. One of the sayings I have is EQ, emotional intelligence, is greater than IQ as long as IQ is above 100. So you have to have, a baseline level of intelligence. But after that, it's more important how you're able to, especially as a leader, get the work out of your team. The results of a leader is purely the output of your team. And there's a easy way to show that. If you're an individual contributor and you're 50% better than everybody else, I mean, that's pretty impressive. But if you're a leader leading 10 people and you're able to get just 10% more out of each of your people, that's doubling the output of that individual contributor. So being able to understand the emotional aspect, what motivates people, how can you get the most out of them? That's extremely important, and especially important because the United States always goes to war as a coalition. And so countries have different cultures. I remember flying in Afghanistan. I was flying in the middle of the night, and I don't think people understand the mountains in Afghanistan. Some of them go up to 25,000 feet. That's almost as high as Mount Everest. And I remember flying over this valley, and there's a fire and just a small, like a fire pit, bunch of people around the fire pit. I slewed my targeting pod down there, and it was at 15,000 feet in the middle of the night. A group of Afghans there hanging out. I don't know what they were doing, but I mean, it just was pretty eye-opening to see this culture where it's so tribal. You have people at 15,000 feet just hanging out. That's something that you wouldn't see, in the US. And, just understanding that culture and how they're tribal and don't necessarily, see themselves like the West. That's an extremely important point to understand, especially when you're going to war, and especially when you're dealing with other countries, trying to work together or fight against a country. That's probably even more important than, some of the other things out there.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I mean, that knocked it out of the park. It's perfect.
I love it. Jeff, do you have any questions for Hasard?
Yeah. So first of all, congratulations on writing a book. I think that's awesome. I wrote 4. So
so you know the pain. It's
I do know the pain. I do know the pain, and I would I am of the so I will go out and get your book, right? Because I am of the opinion that if someone's taken the time to actually write, edit, and promote their book, that it's worth it to them, it's probably worth it to other people out there. So I'm happy to get. But what was your impetus, right? So people have asked me why I explained it, and I'm not going to explain it again. Not here. This is your show, right? But so what was it? What was the impetus? What made you want to do this?
Yeah. So coming back from Afghanistan, a lot of intense missions. I'd been selected to fly the F-35, which was the latest jet, and so I had a couple of months before I started F-35 training. And so what I really didn't want to forget some of the missions. And so I started writing down some of the stories that I had. And at the same time, I wanted to be able to share some of the lessons that we've learned as fighter pilots, because there's a lot of lessons learned, a lot of kind of institutionalized knowledge in terms of human performance, decision-making, planning. Sometimes we're planning missions that are months or years in the future. So it's not just short-term decision-making, it's more project management. So how can I combine some of these stories that I had and some of the institutionalized knowledge that we've had as fighter pilots and be able to share that with the world? Because I think there's always good things happen when information flows across borders and it's not siloed so much. And so I started writing a book. And as you know, it's very painful. Wrote every word in the book and went through multiple revisions. And once it went out into the world, it did really well. It was a Wall Street Journal bestseller, and it's been a bestseller in several other countries as well. So that was great to see. And it's the first audiobook in history where parts were read from the jet. And so we're able to read parts, the intros to each chapter in the jet, and then I read the book as well. So. It was really, really a painful experience, but rewarding experience. I think that applies to everything. Anything that's painful out there is rewarding. I can't think of too many things that were easy and rewarding. And so, but kind of the impetus to writing it was to be able to share this information that we've learned over the years as fighter pilots so that people can apply it in their everyday life.
When you go to these far-flung places, you talked about that fire that you saw. Like I'm walking around Afghanistan looking at this mountain, and I'm like, oh, the heather is changing colors. It's beautiful. And like you're kept wrapped up in like the beauty of a place, the beauty of a people, all these things, while you have this inhumane thing going on, all this conflict and everything. And it is interesting. And sometimes I have to snap myself back and remember, like, I'm actually doing a job here. I'm not just here sightseeing, but it's so culturally rich, and my brain is looking. First off, I'm looking for things like you guys. I'm scanning for anything that stands out that I need to direct my attention towards. But quite often, it is something a miracle, like little kids out running around. I'm talking like little kids just running free, and I'm like, they let toddlers run amok here, And look, I'm sure they've got some kind of invisible rules on where they can and can't go, but you can see so much. It informs how I work, because I'm trying to understand the people. And if you ask them about the nature of them, they're going to tell you more. But I don't know, does that apply to flying a jet? Can you get lost in the beauty of the sunrise in the mountains for very long? Or,
so much.
I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Yeah.
So much. I mean, it's especially Afghanistan. I was would say if there weren't a bunch of people trying to run around, cut your head off, like it would be the best ski resort in the world.
Oh my God. Right.
The mountains are incredible out there. It blows away anything that you'd see in the US. 25,000 feet. That's crazy. It forms the Hindu Kush that goes all the way into Mount Everest. I mostly flew at night though. And I remember on the missions, we'd have maybe 15, 20 minutes of transit time, sometimes longer. And so you'd be flying kind of at high altitude. It's completely black out there. You'd be under night vision goggles and you could just look up and see all the stars out there. Like you could see the Milky Way underneath your night vision goggles. And so you'd just be done with this really intense mission. You've been out there for, flying for, I don't know, 6-7 hours. And now you have a few minutes to rest and you're just looking up and you're just kind of pondering what happened. You have a few minutes till it gets really intense when you're trying to land, and you're just seeing the Milky Way up there and you can see all the stars. And so, you just kind of let your mind drift for a few minutes there. And so that was, something that still seems like yesterday.
Yeah. Jeff, any thoughts on the beauty of combat and what's around us and everything?
Yeah. I mean, so I did a couple Afghan tours, right? So I did one flying, and then I did one on the ground. And I would tell you that Hasard, I guess you didn't get a fly during the day, or if you did, maybe you didn't fly down in Helmand.
Not a lot though.
Yeah, but I would tell you, if you get down to Helmand province and you're up at 18, 19, 20,000 feet, and you're looking down, and it's this unbelievable, beautiful field of poppies, right? I mean, it's a color that you just can't get out of your brain. It's just mesmerizing. It looks like out of the Wizard of Oz, and you're like, other than being heroin, it's unbelievably gorgeous, right? And so yeah, I'm the same way. I have a little bit of an edgy question for Hasard, if he's willing to entertain it. If he's not, I completely understand. But my third book's called Afghan Ghosts, and it's based on, it's all minor fiction thriller because it's funner to write, and I loosely tied all my history into that, right? So I didn't want to teach anybody. I wanted to tell stories. So good on you for wanting to teach, but there's a couple parts in Afghan Ghosts that were hard to write, right? That they were physically just hard to write. Were there any lessons that you learned in Afghanistan that you're like, okay, I have to put pen to paper for this, but it's going to be hard to either A, write it, or B, let people know that I was exposed to it, or I have to share it?
Certainly. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot that was difficult in there. One was, so we were there on Veterans Day 2016, and there was a suicide bombing on Bagram. And so 4 U.S. service members died. A lot of people were injured. And, usually you're not doing these group gatherings, but it was Veterans Day. There's a run right at sunrise. And so this former Taliban soldier had been smuggling on, who was working on base, had been smuggling on explosives, and he walked up to the crowd and blew himself up. And so that was very difficult to walk through again. But then also researching it was very hard because this guy was a former Taliban member. And so there's this program to rehabilitate Taliban members and employ them on base. And so there are just so many flaws in the security system that let him in, including knowing he was a Taliban soldier, letting him on. The guy had multiple issues, like he was checking out voltmeters and not returning them. Like it was very obvious, and there's so many breaches in security. So understanding that aspect of it, of how unnecessary this was. So yeah, there were several stories like that were challenging, but I think kind of digging into that stuff is A, therapeutic, and then B, maybe that'll help in the future to prevent something similar.
Yeah, good on you for doing that. I agree. It's cathartic to a degree for yourself, and shedding transparency on what I think you, Pete, myself, and other guys did over there. It is is a step towards actually trying to tackle some of the mental health issues that a lot of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines are struggling with back in the States. So good on you.
When you're up and you're flying, are you constantly on a mission? How do you maintain your state of readiness if it's just a light day at the office and you're just, whatever, from my point of view, flying in circles? Like how do you maintain that awareness, or are you busy the entire time?
Yeah, are you talking more like in a training aspect, or
no? I mean, like if you're going up that day in Afghanistan or Iraq or over Syria, and there's just there's no call, right? Like you just don't have anything to do. Does that happen very often? And then how do you maintain your state of readiness when you are between missions and you're just trying to whatever, I don't know. I mean, I know you have a million gauges to check, and I'm not trying to say you guys don't have stuff to do, but there's busy work and then there's combat work.
Yeah. It's challenging. You always want to stay engaged. You want to stay focused. It can be a little bit challenging, especially on missions where there's not a lot going on, but I think you can make up work for yourself. So, you have a targeting pod, you can see what's going on, slew it around and try to build up your situational awareness. But yeah, it's tough when you're flying at 3 a.m. in the morning and your circadian rhythm is all off. But I think you have to stay engaged somehow. And so, just finding work for you to do, because there's really nothing else out there. It's not like you have Netflix in your cockpit, your hand flying everything.
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet.
Right.
Maybe in the future that'll be even more dangerous. But so you're just trying to build up your situational awareness so that you're prepared if something happens, like you can get back into it. But the fact of the matter is the highest fatality rate is people coming back from mission, so not actually being on the mission. Because, especially like in the Middle East, Afghanistan, really tall mountains, you've been on this long mission, whether a lot's happened or not, you're coming back, the adrenaline's coming down, or you're a little bit bored from flying 5-hour mission and not a lot's happened. And then now you got to be on your A game. And so what I always found was staying focused is a lot easier than losing focus and trying to bring it back. Because once you lose focus, there's this momentum that happens. And so just always finding little things for you to do, or you can always be getting better. So the targeting pod has all these features, all these menus, so you can kind of just go through that and kind of give yourself training, even when you're in combat and not a lot's happening. So I think there's always something to do. Each flight hour is precious. For instance, the F-35, it's about $50,000 an hour to fly it. So Each hour that you're flying is a lot of money. So might as well try to get the most out of it.
Yeah. Jeff, anything to add there about the monotony of, for anybody else, it'd be like a mind-blowing experience. But for you, you're like, yeah, I've already checked my gravostats valve and I know I have enough, tap, tap, tap. I've tapped all the gauges, right? What do you do to maintain your readiness when there isn't a whole lot to do?
Yeah, well, I had the luxury of being in a family model, so you could talk to other guys without going out on the radio, which makes it a little easier. One of the pilots that I flew with, his name was Dave Souza, call sign Jughead, right? Jughead was this, Naval Academy grad, super double E geek dude. And on his kneeboard card, we have, fly with these kneeboard cards. He'd have a page on his kneeboard card where he would just write down stupid questions. Like, if I push this button and this button at the same time in the Prowler, what'll happen? Right. And he just keeps, like, at night, I guess he writes these things down. I don't know. And so, when you're flying around in your drone and you're drilling circles in the sky, he'll go to that page and just start doing stuff. I mean, he'll, as Hasard said, he'll find busy work. But this guy literally took busy work to almost a science. Like he had a whole page of stuff that he was going to do if he started getting bored, which is always a good thing. And, Hasard touched on and I don't know where you want to take the conversation, but Hasard touched on a really interesting thing right at the end. And it's something that I kind of like to pick his brain about, right? I've been out of the flying game for a long time and he hasn't. And he's right. F-35s are really expensive to fly. Their cost per flying hour is pretty significant. And the Air Force, rightly so, for the taxpayer, wants to maximize the amount of training that you can get and squeeze every ounce of training out of every minute of that hour, right? and where I'm going with this is, you're going to be an F-35 pilot who's going to do mission planning for maybe 6 to 8 hours, right? You're going to prep and brief and get ready for maybe 2 to 3, and then you're going to go fly 1 hour, and you're going to come back and debrief. Who knows, 4 or 5? I mean, this is more than a day event for just 1 hour of flying, and there's a lot of, I think, there's a lot of guys that want to go fly that have this nostalgia that it's just like kick the tires like the fires, or jump in and go rip it up. And that's just not the case. And unfortunately, I think this is one of the problems we have with pilot retention and pilot recruiting, I think, in the Air Force, because there's a lot of guys who just that they don't want to do that. I do like the B2 model without going too much in, because the B2 is also ridiculously expensive. And they decided that, hey, why don't we get a couple T-38s here, so we're not putting hours on this $2 billion jet, and giving throwing the keys to a lieutenant or a captain, saying go rip it up and have fun, and no pre-brief, no debrief, just go do it. Do you see a need for that in the F-35? Do you think that's something that the Air Force needs to look at for pilots? Hasard?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the biggest issue is that as we transition to even more advanced versions and models of the F-35 and future aircraft, that it's becoming really challenging to be able to utilize all of the systems and capabilities in a training environment. And so you need a ton of airspace, you need a ton of bandwidth that is not allowed by the FCC in a training environment. Do
you need a navigator? Do you need a do you need a Wizzo?
You might not like this, but I always say the R2D2 is obsolete now for 5th gen plus fighters, and pilots will be someday probably, but all the 5th gen fighters are only single seat now. So I used to like we fly the family model of the F-16 sometimes and give rides to usually it was like maintainers and things like that in the back. So I really miss that as I transition to the F-35. But as you know, and you're an expert with the bandwidth of the frequency ranges, you can't utilize a lot of that in training, and so there's a lot of limitations to being able to do these things in a training environment. And so I don't think that we're going to go that route of having different types of aircraft. Although another discussion is the T-38. That's a supersonic jet trainer that people fly before transitioning to the F-16 or F-35, was designed in the 50s. That thing is old and it needs to be replaced. And it's being replaced by the T-7, but there's a lot of issues with delays on that thing. And so that absolutely needs to change. But to your point, I think the solution is going to be simulators. So being able to utilize really high fidelity simulators where everything's tied together, different weapon systems, enemy weapon systems. And then really that's how you can focus on flying as a 100 aircraft package going into like a really heavily contested environment. And so it is going to require a change in how we operate and how we think, because maybe now it becomes more about airmanship, to your point of taking the F-35, doing different things to make sure that you're a good pilot, and maybe you do more of the tactical stuff in the simulator. And so that's something that is going to have to change going forward, just because of the limitations of the airspace and other things like that.
Have you guys ever heard of Red 6, the company? It's also, I think, a former F-22 or F-35, or I don't know. He was a pilot, and he built a augmented reality shield that sits on your helmet. And so you can do things like work on fueling with a virtual fueler, and you can have formation flying, and you're doing it in a real airplane, but you're not requiring all the other people to be up there. You're not requiring whatever, a KC-130, whatever it's going to be that has the fuel in it. It isn't up there with you. So you're developing familiarity and also dogfighting skills or other kind of skills with an opponent that matches your level or can be just above. And so, but it's all virtual, except for you are actually doing the work in the plane to get the physical reps. Have you guys heard about these guys?
I have. Yeah. So I know him, Bond Robinson. He was British fighter pilot. He also flew the F-22 on exchange. And so, they have a virtual reality helmet, it's augmented reality. So like you're saying, when you're flying, you can have a virtual wingman flying with you. And so I think there's a lot of applications for that, especially in pilot training, where you're learning the basics of how to maneuver in relation to another jet. It is going to be a challenge, especially with the F-35, because the Western Air Force has really put all their eggs into the F-35 bucket. So there's like 15 other partner nations flying the F-35. They're building over 4,000 of them. As a comparison, the F-22, the only other fifth-gen fighter, there's about 180 of them. So really, all the eggs are in the F-35 bucket.
The only U.S. F-35 one.
Well, the U.S. is going to build like 2,000 of them. So like half.
I was joking about the U.S. fifth gen fighter, because the Russians want to say that they're
you're right. You're right. There is a couple other,
and I have challenges with that as well, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah, you're right. There are a couple other fifth gen platforms, Russia, China, and things like that. So just a second. My son is just got back.
I got a kitty cat trying to talk to me.
Oh, nice.
You're not in bad shape. Go ahead.
So yeah, I think it is going to be challenged from a software perspective, because it's so locked down. It's almost like your iPhone, where you can't just put on random software. And so I hope it works out, but it's going to be very, very challenging to be able to put that software onto the F-35 and hardware as well, because the helmets that we fly with are they're custom made for the F-35. They're like $400,000 a piece. There's a lot going on in those. So if they're able to find a way to bring it into the F-35, I think that's going to be very valuable. Also, kind of to elaborate on that, only about 10% of what a modern fighter pilot does is related to like dogfighting and within visual range maneuvering. The majority is beyond visual range. So trying to take out fighters really far away, trying to geolocate surface-to-air missile sites that are really far away as well. So that's a capability that's absolutely needed, of being able to put those emulators into to jets so that you can fight against threats that aren't actually there.
Yeah. Do you have time for one more real quick thing? Or
yeah, sure thing.
You talked about creativity in the book and how it's an exponential power, like increaser. And I totally agree. Again, from my point of view, what I have to do, if I'm thinking like everybody else in that patrol, I won't bring back something the commander doesn't know. So I'm always looking for ways to give that commander what they need to accomplish their mission. That's where my creativity comes in. And you get good at being creative if you've done it enough. So talk about your version of it and what's in the book.
I think creativity is extremely important. And so that's really what separates, a good pilot from a great pilot, is being able to be creative. And so at least, in the F-35, we have a chance to get some of the best pilots in the world to train, and they're very good at stick and rudder skills. They're very good pilots. But one of the things that we sometimes find is they're overly scripted in what they're doing. They write down every single thing that's going to happen. And when something goes wrong, then the wheels fall off. So being able to be creative, to see something that you haven't seen before, and then to be able to make a good decision. And so I think that goes a little bit back to your point of, in combat, sometimes things speed up, sometimes they slow down. The human mind is an incredible capability, incredible machine that you have. And it is fallible. There's certainly areas where issues can happen, but it's also the most creative thing out there, far more creative than AI. A lot of people say, when is a fighter pilot going to be replaced by AI? And it's true, AI is getting better, and it's kind of merging into some of the areas where humans are good at. But the way I would look at it is, it's two big Venn diagrams, and there is an overlap, and AI is increasing, but there's an area, especially with creativity. Humans were creative, we're flexible. Machines are good at, staying on 24 hours, being able to process large amounts of data. And so that creativity is really what sets us apart as humans. And so being able to nurture that, being able to have processes to grow that. One of the things I talk about in the book is effects-based planning. And so that's one of the one of the reasons that led to the overwhelming success during the Gulf War, instead of just focusing on tools, focusing on the effect that you wanted. And so there's a lot of different ways to nurture it. And so I think creativity is critical. And then to kind of build out on the point about humans versus AI, the future is really finding ways to combine the two. And so it's not just going to be humans. It's not just going to be AI drones. It's going to be a couple F-35s, a couple fighters with drone wingmen going in, and now you can de-risk some of the manned assets by having those drones out there, but you're also in close communication with them and directing them, especially when new things come up, because in combat, most unpredictable environment in the world, there's a lot of fog and friction. So there's going to be things that you've never seen before, and you want a human on that leading edge to be able to adapt to those circumstances.
Jeff, anything on creativity?
You know, the park. I couldn't agree more with his statement. We had a recent chief of staff a couple ago. I really liked him. Was General Goldfein, right? And General Goldfein was speaking at in his Senate testimony one time, and he was being asked about the next gen bomber, right? And he was going to be, should the next gen bomber be manned or should it be unmanned? And the senators were pushing on him left and right, and and saying, we're sort of invested so much money. And his answer was, I don't want it to be manned or unmanned. I want to have the choice, right? I want to be able to have a system, because I want to. It's as Hasard said, it's effects based. Like, what effect am I trying to bring to the battle space? If the risk is too great to go in with a manned asset, and all I have is a manned asset, I've limited my options to bring effects into the battle space. But if by the same token, if there's almost no risk, why am I putting a man up there when I could have the guy sleep and, blah, 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 and this and that. So his answer was, I want the decision, right? As the commander, I want to have as many options, as many tools in the toolbox as possible to make it happen. So yeah, I loved his answer. It's great. And gents, I got to cut out. I'm going to let Hasard have the last word. God bless you again. Congrats on your book, man. That's huge stuff. I'm a huge Vipers fan. I've written tons of articles for Kiev Post about F-16s going into Ukraine. I'm a friend of Two Dogs, which is, I don't know if that's a curse or a blessing, but it's what it is. But you guys take care. All right. I'm out.
Awesome. Take care.
All right. See you. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Anything in closing at all, Hasard?
Anything in closing? Well, I really appreciate you having me come on the show. It's always good to be able to talk with other veterans, people with different perspectives. I think there's a lot of best practices that each of the communities have. And so being able to find ways to overlap that is great, and not just military as well. So I go and speak to a lot of different companies and organizations. And so I'm always impressed with the best practices that they have, and some of the things that we have, especially in terms of leadership, accountability, decision-making, and ways we can merge them together. So, I always like learning, I like teaching, and I'm glad you had me on.
Yeah, it's great to be on. I'm in the middle of writing a similar book from my perspective and doing the spy thing, and I can appreciate how hard it is, because I'm really struggling to do it as cleanly as you did. So you're an inspiration.
Well, it wasn't clean. It's, that blinking cursor is tough. I would just write 500 words a day, and then sometimes they were terrible, and I'd have to completely delete it the next day, and sometimes they were okay. So there's never a clean process, but good luck on that.
Fair enough. We'll see how I do. Everybody, this is Hasard Lee, and then you can also get his book right over here. I got my cat in my lap. Right over there. And you guys know what I always say. Buy two. It's fun to buddy read things. And so you're going to absolutely love this book. Here it is. The Art of Clear Thinking. You will love it. I promise. I'll read it with you. But hit me an email, and we'll read this thing together. Everybody, I'll see you tomorrow. Hasard, I'll see you in a second.
Bye.